Started. If you don't want to be on the recording, you can please exit the chat and exit the meeting. And Jay, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for coming and talking to our education community today about Windows Labs.
Not a problem. Happy to be here. So as you can see, my name's Jay Simmons. I'm a software engineer here at Microsoft, actually in the Active Directory team. And the big project that I've been working on for the last year and a half is something called Windows Labs. And I was invited here to come give you guys a little rundown on what it is and how it sort of integrates with Intune. I don't have an EDU background, but managed devices are managed devices, I think. Maybe I can learn something from you guys as well on where this is going. I'm going to go off camera here and run through some slides, and if we have time, I'll do a real short demo. All right, so Windows Labs and Intune. So this may be old hat to many of you, but I'll just briefly breeze through this. So LAPS stands for Local Administrator Password Solution, and its whole purpose is to manage the password for a local admin account. So why is that useful? Well, it's useful for a couple of main scenarios. So like if you have a help desk operator who needs to access a user's device, but perhaps you suspect it of being infected with malware or a virus. When you authenticate with a local account, you're basically limiting the blast radius. A compromised machine already is compromised, so they already probably have access to the password for that. So you can't make things worse if you're connecting using a local admin account. It's also useful for like device recovery scenarios. If the device takes a bad update, can't get on the network, you can't log on with your corporate account, whether that's the AAD account or your on-premise Active Directory account. Now, we shipped a much older version of this thing close to 10 years ago. It still exists. It's an add-on MSI package that you install on Windows, and it's available on the Microsoft Download Center. Now, I've seen the statistics. There's a huge number of our customers who have downloaded and installed this thing. Many millions of on-premise AD join devices are leveraging that technology right now. Now, the whole reason that Microsoft kickstarted this project and we got it going again is because many of our Azure AD customers really want to move to a pure AD join only model, but they weren't willing to do so if it meant leaving the LAPS technology behind. So like it's a little surprising. It's like, you really need this thing? And it's like, well, when you do need it, you really need it. And so they don't want to leave it behind. And then, as you would expect for a thing that the original LAPS had been sort of developed as a side project, and it really did a good job. But it is also many years old, needed some help. So, what are we doing for this new project, or what are we trying to achieve with this deliverable? It's going to be now natively baked into Windows, so no more external MSI packages. We're going to support integration with Azure. Specifically, that means you'll be able to configure the device if it's AAD joined to back its password up to Azure and not just on-prem AD. We've added a whole bunch of new features. Probably of big interest to this audience. We've modernized the management experience. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the key one is that there's a new CSP in Windows now, and you can manage that via Intune. And we've attempted to make migration as easy as possible. So there was such a huge install base of the existing legacy product that we wanted to try to make that somewhat easy. And there's a couple of key features that we've shipped to support that. So I love this diagram because I created it. So obviously I want to be happy with it. But you don't need to know all this to use the feature. But just to be very clear what's going on, managed device on the left, there's a couple of new binaries. There's a new CSP. There's a new PowerShell module from doing management tasks. Now, I have two directories on the right, of course, Active Directory as well as Azure AD. But we only support backing up passwords to one directory or the other. We do not support both at the same time. That's a very common question. Bottom right, we've got Intune. This is an older version of the diagram that I created back before the name change. My bad for not updating that. You can administer policies via Microsoft Intune, or if you're managing, or if you prefer for some reason, and you've got only on-prem AD join devices, you can still do that via group policy. I think what else do I want to say about this? That's about it, I think. All right, so what's new in this feature space for Azure AD? So first and foremost, we're going to store the passwords as we rotate them in Azure. And physically, they're stored on the Azure device object. And when they get stored, I just want to add, because I know that a lot of folks are very security conscious about this, there's an additional layer of AES 256 encryption applied before the password is committed to persistent storage. That's not an everyday thing in Azure. Most data is only protected by the usual, at-rest data protections for that is part of the Azure baseline experience. But given the sensitivity of these lapsed passwords, in other words, they're really a backdoor option in almost any device in the cloud, in your enterprise rather, we wanted to apply additional protections. Cloud-based management experience. So there's going to be, or there already is now, a new Microsoft Graph collection, so that if you want to retrieve these passwords once they've been stored in the cloud, you would do so over the Microsoft Graph endpoint. And we've got a couple of new graph permissions to support that. There's one for reading like the metadata, and one for reading the basic, the full meal deal, the clear text password. We're also going to be supporting RBAC policies, so that in addition to the built-in roles that have permissions, you'll also be able to author custom RBAC policies to suit your security needs. The three built-in roles that have the permissions are global admins, device admins, and Intune admins. Now you don't have to write code, obviously. There is a UI experience. You can get these passwords from the Azure portal, and we have a baseline experience in the AAD devices part of the portal. But I assume that almost all of you folks are going to have Intune subscriptions and use Intune, and so there's also an integrated experience in the Intune portal. And the next one, what I like, is the if you wanted to rotate the password on demand, you now have that ability with an Intune managed device through working with the Windows Labs feature. That was something that never really existed in the legacy Labs product, and it's something that's been a real fun to work on with the collaboration here between internally with Microsoft, between the Azure team and the Windows team. We are not leaving our on-prem customers behind. We are fully supporting hybrid join devices. As a matter of fact, you can apply an Intune policy to a hybrid join device that tells the device to back its password up to on-premise Active Directory. So if you're in that mode and for some reason you feel the need to keep using on-prem AD for a little bit longer, we'll support you. You can do it. The power is really in your hands. Another feature that we've added that people seem to really be resonating with is automatic password reset. So how does this work? So if you retrieve the password from Azure or from on-prem AD, it works the same way, and then you authenticate to the device. Let's say that on day one, the device rotated the password, and so on day two, an admin retrieves the password and then uses it for authentication. They're done in about an hour, and then they log off and they're done. So from a security best practice perspective, ideally, since the task is now completed, we would roll the password. And so we now have a client-driven feature where once you log in with the managed account credentials, you're given a certain grace period, and it's configurable in hours from 1 to 24. And then at the conclusion of the grace period, we will automatically reset the password. All right. I'm not missing any questions, am I? Nope. So far, so good. If there are questions, please don't hesitate to jump in and stop me.
Yeah, there's actually one question here from Kevin. It says, question, it is as easy to set up and manage an Intune. However, if we do not want to use the built-in administrator, there is no easy option to create a local user within those policies. Is it planned to have this added at one point? As of today, we are using a proactive remediation to create a local admin user. I'm wondering what others are doing.
It is a great question, and we've gotten a lot of feedback about that. The original intention was that, look, we've already got like the local account CSP and other mechanisms, and that should be sufficient. But as I've learned, that we had a feature gap there, a functionality gap, where you can't actually create such a user with a brand new random password in an enabled state, and that makes it difficult to get it to compose with this new feature with Windows Labs. So correct me if I got that wrong, Kevin, but I think that's where you're going. One of the features that we're looking at adding down the road is the ability to do automatic account creation within the Labs policy itself. And that way it will be possible without having to resort to the stringing together of multiple policy definitions. You'll be able to do it all within the Labs policy yourself. I could go into more detail on that, but it's something that's like we're just starting to get going on. But yeah, we're hoping to improve that. Thank you.
Yep. Kevin says that sounds awesome, Jay.
Yep, I've got the chat up side by side here. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
All right, perfect. All right, moving on here. So since this is an Intune focused audience, I just wanted to quickly share a little bit about the new CSP. If you go into our online docs, and I can send this deck around along with some links to docs and stuff, you'll see all of this, but I think it's important to see it as well here. If you're familiar with Legacy Labs, a lot of the initial settings under policy there will look very familiar. So administrator account name, how long the password should be considered valid for, how complex do you want it to be, how long do you want it to be. Those are all very straightforward design carryovers from the Legacy Labs product. Now, immediately under the policies node, you see backup directory. It's got really only two possible options, and you'll see those in the docs. Either back it up to AAD or back it up to on-premise Active Directory, as I was saying earlier. The last two ones in white, post-authentication actions and post-authentication action reset delay. This is related to the automatic password reset feature I was mentioning a little bit ago. You have three options in terms of actions. You can, at the termination of the grace period, which is specified by the reset delay policy setting, you can either choose to reset the password, or you can reset the password and forcibly log them off of any console or RDP sessions. Or if you are really going to be hardcore about it, you can actually reboot the box at that point. Now, under the, let me cover the ones down in kind of that off orange at the bottom. For an AAD focused audience, you probably won't care about these. But these are specific, these are only applicable for hybrid join devices when you are backing the password up to on-premise Active Directory. You'll see some encryption related things there. One of the huge improvements that we shipped for the on-premise AD IT admin was the ability to encrypt passwords before they actually go into on-premise Active Directory. So if you were to be using or administering hybrid devices and having them do that, back up their passwords to AD, these would be of great interest to you. And I do recommend you take a look at those in the docs, those scenarios. Up above, I know it's up above, but I'm coming back to it at the top there. Under actions, so if for those of you that are familiar with Intune, you know that certain CSPs support actions. And so we have two here. One of them is an asynchronous reset action. So this tells the target device, reset the password immediately. And then the other one is a polling status action that says, okay, please tell me how the last reset password operation went. I should add, just in case there are any on-prem customers here, these policies are basically at parity. We're at parity between the CSP management surface area as well as a brand new group policy object that is now shipping in Windows, with the exception of the action nodes. Now that is a special extra functionality that only Intune can provide. And the other thing that I was going to mention is that I heard the discussion earlier about, like policy ordering preference. I worked really closely with the Intune team when designing all this, And it's some in the docs I go into great detail to make it clear that we have a policy ordering precedence rule. If you are applying these policies both from the CSP as well as from an on-premise GPO, i.e. to a hybrid joint device, the CSP is at the top of the heap and it will always win, and its settings will take effect. So there should never be any confusion about that. I talked briefly a little bit. I think this slide was more for developer-oriented audience, but just to be very clear, reset password, this is an asynchronous action. And basically, as I said earlier, you would invoke the reset password action, you'd get back a pending code, and then you would just pull the device as you see fit to get the outcome. And typically, I don't want to let people get the wrong idea that you're sitting there polling for 30 or 40 minutes. Usually it's on the order of, 30 seconds and it's done, less than that. So it's relatively quick. So if I have time, I'll bring up a browser and I'll go through a few of the policies. So I'm thinking that many of you may have already seen these things, but there's a brand new policy authoring UI in Intune, and under the account protection section, I'll show that a little bit later. Among the other improvements in the Windows client itself is a dedicated event log channel. So the Legacy Labs product, if you ever used it, it was a great product for what it did. It was also a little bit opaque when things went wrong. And so we've tried really hard, given the sensitivity of these passwords, to make it like very simple to be able to go back into the event log history and know exactly what happened and when and why. I also talked earlier about the password retrieval option. So this is the Azure Devices blade. And as you can see here, there is a new preview section, and there's a show local admin button. And then you click on that and the little thing over on the right pops up. The plain text password that I have here in this screen snippet is not displayed by default. You do have to click something to show that. You'll see a little in the bottom right, you'll see there is a section called additional passwords. And I should add, I just want to comment that AAD offers limited support for password history for Windows Labs enabled devices. So they've given us enough storage for the current password plus 3 older ones, and that is still in effect today. However, when you go look at this UI right now in live versions of Azure, you won't see the additional password section. So they felt like they didn't want to support that for the mainline scenario, and so you'd have to resort to programmatically getting those passwords if you needed them for older versions. And just, I think everybody, this may be obvious, but in case it's not, why would you need a password history for these things? Usually it comes into play when you are restoring an image from a backup. So the current machine is just totally busted, won't boot or whatever, and you're booting to a backup, but you're booting to a point in time with the backup when the current password wasn't yet created. So you need to go backwards. Then I also talked a little bit about this. This is the new action available in the Intune portal, so that if you need to rotate the local admin password for any reason, you can do that. This is actually filling a functionality gap. So again, I know I keep repeating this, but if you are familiar with the Legacy Labs product, then you are familiar with the fact that you could induce an earlier than expected password expiry by modifying a password expiry timestamp in the on-premise AD directory. And that worked really well for that product, but it only works because the device, the Legacy Labs GPO client-side extension, is pulling that timestamp every time it wakes up on a GPO refresh cycle. So in other words, every 30 minutes. And that was actually our intent for the Azure-based design here, until we told the Azure team that, yeah, we asked them basically, it's like, yeah, you guys don't mind if we have 100 million machines polling you 48 times a day, do you? And they were like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. So There is no polling in the new when you're backing up the password to Azure Active Directory. Again, that's just done for general scalability reasons. Instead, the password is stored locally on the device, and it will just automatically recognize when it's time to rotate the password. Now, if you do need to induce an early rotation, you can do that with there's a local inbox commandlet. So if you have access to the device, you can force a rotation immediately. That's accessible to anyone who's a local admin. Or if you have an Intune subscription, you can do it all really nicely and easily from the cloud, like is shown here on this particular slide. Any questions? Am I doing okay here? See anything in the chat? Okay, looks like we're good. Okay. Luis asked, is LAP still in preview? So it's a little bit of an odd, it's a good question. It's a good question. We shipped the Windows client bits in the April 11th patch, just a little under a month ago, to 5 in-market supported platforms, the 2 flavors of Windows 11, Windows 10, and Server 2022 and Server 2019. I know server platforms aren't usually talked about much with respect to AAD administration, but we still have a lot of on-premise customers who are running servers and want to use this functionality in the on-prem space. Now, to your question, you asked about is it still in preview? Well, when we ship something in Windows via Windows Update, it's not really preview. It's there, and we are fully supporting it. However, from a scenario perspective, the backing up the passwords to Azure AD is still in public preview. So it went public preview on, I believe it was the 21st of last month, about 10 days after we shipped the bit. So let me just double check. Yeah, it was the 21st. And thank you. There you go. That answer your question, Luis? I hope so. Leland asked a question, is assume the only way to look up the LAPS password on the local machine is via PowerShell. On the local machine, on a machine, you can't query the machine itself for the password. The clear text password is gone. Obviously, it's stored only as a hash. If it's an AAD stored password, you have to go hit the portal. Now, it's also the portals aren't doing anything fancy behind the scenes. They're all working through the Microsoft Graph endpoint. So there is an inbox commandlet, and I'll give you a quick view of it here real quick, which is the GitLab's AAD password commandlet, which provides you with a fairly simple way to query the Microsoft Graph endpoint for passwords once you've done some certain configuration steps. If you were talking about on-prem AD passwords, there's a whole new retrieval experience via a different password, which is focused on the AD scenario. All right. Christopher asks for on-prem AD password storage on a device that was using legacy labs. No, it won't. Well, it shouldn't. And here's what happens in the scenario you just outlined, Christopher. So if you enable the new Windows Labs native policy, and you obviously, if you're going to run legacy labs side by side, there's some other considerations. But let's say you've uninstalled the legacy labs CSE. In terms of the policy precedence ordering, the inbox Windows code, it will now has the ability to honor the legacy labs policy. But your question was, if you enable the new policy setting, once we start to honor the new policy setting and the legacy labs CSE is no longer installed, we will configure new attributes. So this new feature, if you're using it for on-prem AD, does require a custom extension of your schema with a whole new set of attributes. A lot of good reasons for this. It was really, really too hard to try to figure out a safe way to support this feature as it would compose with legacy labs if we were using the same attributes. So what will happen is that you'll see new attributes pop up in Active Directory. And if the legacy labs CSE is not installed, the device will try to automatically clean the legacy passwords from the legacy labs ats, which would then cause the legacy labs UI to come up with nothing. All right. Any Encryption in Active Directory, Patrick asked about this. There is a key somewhere, but this is using the standard Windows DP API for the on-prem AD encryption. When it works, the way that works, it's an epoch-based rolling key that is stored in the domain controllers, and the master key is used to help store other leaf keys, if you will. I'm not the expert on this. The first step you have to gain access to a password stored that's encrypted in the on-premise Active Directory. The first thing you need to do is have the LDAP permissions that are sufficient to query the encrypted password blob from the directory. And then once you as the client have a hold of the encrypted blob, you then request that be decrypted, which then requires that the client go back to another domain controller, or maybe probably the same one, to get the decryption key for it. So all the keys are stored in Active Directory, and they're only handed out to authorized clients. How do you get authorized? Well, you're authorized if you are the user or group that the password was targeted to when the client device first encrypted it. I hope that helped. All right, we're about 9 minutes away. Let's see here. And I very briefly, so over here, I've got a browser. And this is just one of my random test tenants. And here's a device that I set up earlier today. And over here, you can see we've got a lapse recovery section. And it tells you the last time it was rotated. And it tells you when the device expects to rotate it in the future. In this case, I had the very, what is about an 11-day approximately password age day thing. And we can say show. Now the device is sending the SID, but honestly, that's probably not very useful to a majority of folks. It gives you the account name. Now this is another change from the Legacy Labs product. We in all cases, both for Azure AD as well as on-premise AD, we are storing the account name now side by side with the password. I just think that makes a lot more sense. There's no guesswork. I mean, like as anyone knows, the password and the account name are sort of a matched pair. And now we're storing them side by side. I've got some plans for that. Nothing's really developed yet, but I think there's some security benefits that would result if we were able to rotate the account name every single time. And then right here, we can just do a quick copy to the clipboard. Or if we really wanted to see it, we can do a show the password, and here it is in clear text. I'm not going to demo right now trying to use that, but trust me that lots of people are using this and it works. One complaint we've had about these passwords. Now, for those of you familiar with Legacy Labs, I keep saying that, be aware that the password generation algorithm has not changed whatsoever. It's inherited pretty much as is, which means you get these really gnarly looking passwords, which are highly secure and totally not human friendly. So one of the roadmap items we've been asked to look at is, what could we do to make these things a little bit better? One idea, of course, is a passphrase generator. That's not something Microsoft has ever been, really gone in the direction of in the past, but it is an idea. And then another idea would be at least don't display similar characters side by side, like the digit 1 and the lowercase l. Those type of things make these passwords very hard to type into a credential dialog. All right, and then I wanted to go briefly over to here. This is obviously the Intune portal. And if we go under endpoint security and then account protection, and we can create a policy. When 10 and later, and here's the new one. Now, I believe I am not on the Intune team, but I am aware that they had in their catalog a policy that would set the settings honored by the Legacy Lab CSE. So apologies for the naming conflict, but I simply could not come up with a better name, so we're kind of stuck with it now. And I don't feel too bad because nobody else could come up with a better one either. I've joked about it though. It's like we could have named it Active Lab. So, all right, so we're gonna go say next. All right, so if you wanted to, you can also disable the backup directory. And that means that if you disable it at the CSP level, you're basically saying this device is not doing this whatsoever, even if a lower level policy in the precedence ordering, for instance, GPO or something locally set, or the legacy labs policy, even if those are set, you can say, nope, it's not happening, at least with the inbox code. So we're going to say back it up to Azure AD. And then we've got all the typical things that you would expect here. Here's the post authentication actions that I talked about before. You can configure the grace period on the post auth from anywhere from 1 to 24. Um, as Kevin asked earlier, there is a little bit of a sharp knife here in terms of the scenario experience. If you leave administrator account name blank, we will manage the built-in administrator account. It is your responsibility to enable it. If you give us the name of a custom account, then it is all your responsibility to both create that account and make sure it's in the proper state. Okay, so that is not the greatest experience. Customers are getting it to work, but as I said earlier, hopefully we can do something to improve that. I'm coming up on time here, so I'm just going to go briefly. If you'll notice, if we flip this around to the Active Directory one, now this is, you can only do this, and I think this is going to be obvious, but if you send this policy down to a device that is only AAD joined, in other words, it's a non-hybrid device, you should see an error trying to apply the policy to the device. So don't attempt to do that. But if it is a hybrid joined device, you can do all the things that I just described, but then you can also choose the encryption format. On-premise AD password encryption does require a Windows Server 2016 domain functional level. For those of you that remember those things, there is a technical reason for that. It's not just us trying to push people along into upgrading, but just be aware of that. What else? Oh, and then if you wanted to, by default, if you don't configure the encryption principal field, it will encrypt, the device will encrypt the password so that only domain admins can decrypt it. If you have a need to make the password accessible to certain other entities or users or groups, you can configure that here, either as a fully qualified name or as a SID if you really want to go low level. All right, so I think that's about it. I mean, the rest of this is standard Intune policy administration stuff that I think you guys know way better than I do. So I think at that, I'm going to stop my presentation. If we've got any questions real quick, I can take them, and I can also respond offline.
Yeah, Jay, looks like there's a few more questions in the chat. Not too many, but just a few in there.
Here, I'm looking. Patrick asked, how does encryption work? Basically, it's that the box that I just showed, Patrick. You give us the name of a user or group, and the device will make sure it's resolvable, that it actually exists, and then we will encrypt it so that the only entity that can get the decryption key is the one that you specified. So if, as I said, we default to domain admins, but you could also create a custom security group and say, okay, only members of this, my custom domain lapse admin security group can decrypt these passwords. But I think the real win there is not just that you can encrypt them in the first place, but that you can use the various GPO encryption slicing and dicing policy assignment techniques to assign stricter encryption targets to more sensitive devices, if you will. I saw a hand up, Scott.
That was an accident. Go ahead. Just ignore it. I lowered it.
No worries. Does the admin account have to be enabled in order for Labs to manage the password? It does not have to be enabled. In fact, I've learned something from, I've been talking to a lot of customers and I'm learning a lot. And it turns out that a lot of them leave the Labs managed account in a disabled state until it's time to use it, and then they will actually move the device into a different OU, which will then cause another policy to run that enables the account. So as things currently are right now, Windows Labs can manage the password for a disabled account just fine. We'll log a warning in the event log complaining about it, saying, hey, it's not our fault if you can't use this thing. But it will work. So that approach is just fine. Does Microsoft have a best practice regarding blah, blah, blah? I think definitely, look, we generally discourage the use of the built-in admin account. Yes, you can rename it, and that will mitigate most of the risks of it having a well-known name. But I think in general, you're best off just to leave the built-in admin account disabled forever and never use it. So both disable it and rename it. Yes, renaming does not change the SID, but I don't think there's much of a risk from the well-known SID if the account is disabled.
So in the modern OS, a long time ago, there was a difference between using the built-in admin and a created local admin because there were some tokens or privileges that were granted to the built-in that weren't necessarily there for a local admin. So just in some isolated incidents, there were times when you could do things with the built-in admin that you might have some failure with a local admin. That's the reason I ask. And maybe that's not an issue in the modern OS.
Possibly. But I bet you if there is something that a non-built-in admin can't do, it's probably for a speed bump reason, as opposed to, in other words, he could probably turn around and grant himself whatever he needed to accomplish the job. Good point, though. I don't actually know, David. Any other questions? I hope my talk helped a little bit and let you guys know where we're going and what's out there right now for you to use.
Jake, real quick, can you sketch out what the process would be like, just in the briefest of terms, from going from the existing laps to the new laps? Like, what would you have to do?
Sure. First of all, you got to decide, okay, do I want to migrate in one step, or do I want to run them both side by side for a certain period of time? So your existing machines are managed by legacy laps. They're managing the foo account. Now, what you can do is that with the new Windows laps, you'd install it, and the first thing it's going to do is going to say, okay, I see that there's a legacy laps policy, but I also see that the legacy laps is installed, so I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to do anything. You could then configure a native new Windows Labs policy, but you would have to configure it to target a different account. I know that that's a burden. There's an administrative burden there, but you could do it. Once you get that up and running, you now have two engines, the Windows Labs as well as Legacy Labs, running side by side. They're both managing different accounts, but they're coexisting just fine. That's one approach. Then you just run like that until you're comfortable. Then once you're really comfortable, you disable the Legacy Labs policy, you uninstall and remove the Legacy Labs CSE, and now you are migrated over completely to the new Windows Labs policy managing the new account. That help?
Yeah, that's great. I think you answered one of the things. Is like, did you have to uninstall the old Laps executables, the MSI install before you did the other? And clearly you don't. So that's great.
No. So
good to know.
It's no secret. I've been very blunt in public and in our docs about bugs. We did have a bug in the initial April 11th update where if you took a machine that did not have Legacy Labs installed and you applied the April 11th update and then you installed the Legacy Labs client, that would put the machine into a broken state where the password and stored in AD and locally was out of sync. I'm happy to say that is fixed today. And so what you should see happen with today's updates that just shipped this morning, the design intent, and if you see otherwise, email me. The design intent is that the new inbox Windows Labs code will coexist with an installed Legacy Labs client-side extension, and we will flip back and forth honoring that policy as you add and remove the Legacy Labs binary. Now, do you want to flip back and forth? No, but we tried very hard to make it as safe as possible.
Great.
And ideally, you're going to move to pass. If you're still doing on-premise and AD backups, ideally you're going to move to the new policy anyway and take advantage of encryption.
Yeah, thanks. I would also kind of, I guess, I think it was Kevin at the beginning who mentioned that, and I think you addressed it too, which is like creating, if you're not using the built-in administrator account, then creating that other account for it to manage is painful, right? Because currently you can create an account. You can create an account through policy, but I believe right now, because of security reasons, you can't set a password.
So
right initially.
I'm still playing with this myself, and I don't want to pretend I am an Intune or a GPO policy expert. I'm sure there are people on this call that can run rings around me, but it does suggest to me that there's sort of a necessary, with the existing inbox tools, there's sort of a necessary stutter step, which is create the account without a password in the disabled state, wait long enough for the inbox code to set a password on it, even though it's still in a disabled state. And now you can enable it without getting the error that says, I can't enable it because it doesn't have a password that meets the inbox password policy. I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a catch-22 because it's like, it can't manage the account until I create the account, but I don't want to create an account with no password. But I can't set a password through policy. So
I'm not suggesting that. I totally get it. And we're yes, I get it. I get the problem, and it's something I wish we had done a better job on. And we're looking at some new design changes where we would be able to make this much easier, more of a one-stop shop right within the Windows Labs policy.
Cool.
But it is possible. So, there's still a lot of value add there.
Right.
Rome wasn't built in a day, so I apologize.
I guess, and one thought, and just thinking off the top of my head, what I'm just thinking in terms of a use case. So the end purpose of this is to be able to essentially give a local non-admin user, an admin access for a limited period of time, correct?
Yep.
So it seems like everything you're giving us gives us all the functionality to do that. And what would be kind of cool would be to have an interface that kind of rolls that up into, like, if I could pull something up that says, hey, issue admin access to this user on this machine for this period of, it's not really for that user, but it just, so it sends it to that person for this period of time, and for this, that's good for this period of time, and then resets the password like after an hour or whatever, like roll all that up into one interface, and then just, so boom, and then sets all the settings and goes.
I hear what you're saying. Somebody could build an orchestrator that orchestrates all those settings, I think, with what we have shipping today. It could be done. We do not have that in the box today.
So
maybe a value add third party could do it.
But
they could.
Isn't Labs though more about managing the password of the local administrator account and not so much handing that out to users? Isn't that just in time administration? That's something different.
I think Labs in the early days started out as, oh my Lord, we've got all these enterprises that have enabled local admin accounts with identical passwords. And I think it went after that scenario first. But from my chatting with customers, it's grown more into the help desk / device recovery type building block. So yes, it randomizes the password, but nobody, most of these accounts are disabled by default anyway, so they're not really a threat. But it's when you need the help desk or the break glass type thing that it really helps these days, I think.
All right, gentlemen, we need to go ahead and be respectful of Jay's time. Jay, thank you so much for speaking today. I really appreciate your time and grateful that you made the time here. And if there are other questions, could we just maybe add you to a team, our internal team? We have one on the Microsoft tenant, and maybe they could post them there. Would that be easy for you, or
that would be great. Go ahead and add me.
Okay. Well, we can do that. And folks, for everyone on the call, if there are questions, we'll create a mechanism where you can communicate to Jay through the team, And this way you can provide feedback, use that feedback hub that we have a link to, and we'll share those in the slides, and we'll make all this stuff available here very shortly. So I hope you got a lot out of today's call. And Jay, again, thanks so much for taking your time today, and I hope everybody got something out of this. So we're going to have our next meeting in 2 weeks, so that will be on May 16th. So if you have anything in between then, please just post it in our community question channel, and